Yep.
Hey folks, welcome to LinkedIn Live here with Dave Manica and Chris Morrison. Hey Chris, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, Dave. How about you?
I'm doing fantastic. So we're going to be continuing our conversations around disruptive products, agile market entry. And the topic today that you want to dig into is the myth of overnight market success. So we'll discuss the real disadvantages of a big product launch. We'll talk about how small and early markets can lead to huge market growth. And you can tell some stories. Chris might be a little bit of a storyteller for us, maybe.
Yeah, we've
Um,
already got stories here or there.
10 reasons starting small leads to big market opportunities. So we got some cool things we're going to talk about. This concept of overnight success, it kind of peeves Chris off a little bit. So he might get a little, you know,
Fired
passionate,
up.
fired up and passionate here in a little bit. So let's talk about it. So Chris, here we go.
Here, David.
When we
Where,
first,
where did we start?
all right, when we first discussed this topic, it took me right back to my first time I heard about Facebook. That's what you're saying. It was already taking over the world, running through your MySpace. I can't believe you actually had a MySpace account. Did you have a MySpace account?
No, I didn't, but I just remember, that was the big deal there for a while. And then Facebook, when it showed up, it just overwhelmed MySpace and blew them away.
So, and of course, we hear all the stories about the friend who hits their big time with their startup. So, what's your thoughts?
Well,
What's your thoughts on this myth, the stories, the unicorns? Give us your thoughts.
well, like you said, the other one I remember about the first time was the first time a friend of mine were up in New York City and they pulled out the phone to hail an Uber.
The Uber.
I mean, that was
The
like,
hail and Uber. Come on, man. That's like a mixing metaphor.
yeah,
Hail and Uber.
hail an Uber.
What do you do with an Uber? What do you call it?
And it's like, wow, and the Uber, like Facebook took over the world. Uber was, I didn't even know about Uber up until that moment. Then it was everywhere.
Well, the Venmo thing got me. Venmo, what? What's
Yeah,
that?
well, that's another one. But and I don't know, and
You sound like an old person too. So what's that? I've never heard that before.
what, Venmo?
No, just in general, when you get these, these new things pop up.
Oh,
Like,
right.
what's that, Sonny? How do you use that thing again?
Oh, exactly.
All right, so we know all this unicorn stuff, right, man? It's
Yeah,
out there.
we all hear about it. When you get, in the, I deal with startups a lot, but big companies, you see it too. There's this press, this idea of everything goes big and goes big fast. Media, the media pumps all this stuff up. Investors. I mean, man, you want to talk about pressure to get early revenue. I remember, even like, people building out their revenue models. They've got the hockey stick.
Hockey stick, baby.
It seems like it, it hits it.
Everybody has a hockey stick, and all the hockey sticks work out.
Oh yeah, they every startup revenue plan.
Why I can't believe it just continues. It's like insanity over and over again. But just to remind the audience, if you have any comments or thoughts you want to share with us as we dig deeper into this topic, please don't hesitate to post them in, and we'll post your comment up so we can look at it and talk about it and potentially dissect it. So, Chris, what does all this mean?
So, but I think the point I'm trying to make, David, is that that's not how markets are built.
Okay.
That's not how products are launched. Even if you look at all the ones we talked about, Facebook, Uber, Tinder, Airbnb, if you look at the history of those and you go back to the early days before we all heard about them, that's not the way they were started. They were all started small, nichey, going after very targeted markets early on to start building traction and develop. So, I mean, we talk about it, we think about it, media pushes it.
Just because I'm a big company, Chris, means I can launch a product to all my salespeople and it's going to work.
Exactly. And that's what kind of ends up happening when it gets disseminated out. Is I was talking to a good friend about this just a couple weeks ago. About they've had a product in a big med tech company. They had a nurse call system that they launched over 3 years ago, and they're still struggling with it. They pushed it out to the whole sales force from day one in Australia. But the point,
so you can look at
that this isn't how we build.
So every comp you can look at, comp after comp after comp, is it took time. Whether it's a startup that multiple pivoted, whether
Yep.
it is a big company who rolled out something new.
Yep.
I have my own small experience when I rolled out a new division for DevOps training, and it didn't happen overnight, but after 4 or 5 years, it's a $5 million business. I mean, it's amazing. If you stick to it, you have the right mindset. But it started out with a beachhead market, and I know you're going to get into this beachhead market concept, but it was not an overnight success.
Yep, it was not. And from my perspective, as I've progressed through my career, I think beachhead's too big an idea anymore. I think the ones I've seen, the nichier and the smaller and the more targeted they are coming out of the gate, the more successful they tend to be over the long term. The ones that try to go big early on get lost, and they actually don't execute. And this idea of going small actually allows you to execute efficiently, effectively, but also it allows you to get to scale, which is the most important thing.
Yeah.
Much, much quicker. And we talk about, another example, Medtronic, one of the biggest med tech companies out there. I mean, they didn't start with a big, but they started as a repair shop, and in a garage up in Minneapolis somewhere, Minnesota somewhere, and a cardiologist came to him and asked him, "Listen, I had a patient die from with a pacemaker. Can you make a battery operated pacemaker?" And that's how Medtronic, very, very targeted, very small niche markets, and there's just huge. Looking at it this way and going about it this way, there's just, as you alluded to in the lead-in, when I started putting together today's talk or the concepts around what I wanted to talk about, I came up with 10 different reasons why it's much better to go small than try this big path right out of the gate. And
so every piece of data point shows that you start out small, you pivot accordingly, you adjust, and you make it happen. I mean, that's what happens in the startup worlds, like you said, with Uber starting out over a 7x7 square mile radius of a certain section of San Francisco, so they could adjust and pivot over time. So why do you think the big companies don't get that? And where we see the biggest mistakes are the big, massive product launches that occur within large organizations.
Well, I think it's just not large organizations. I see it happen in small organizations as well. But one is this idea of this, they build out a plan that has this whole big launch mapped around it, and then they have this big launch, and when I say big launch, they have a media, they have press release, they go to shows, marketing scales all this stuff, and they start spending money to drive leads. But what they don't have, and this is where it becomes really acute, David, is with the disruptive products we talk about. When you don't have a repeatable process to sale, a lot of that, we've talked about this previously, the premature scale, and a lot of that resource that they throw at that product launch fails. I mean, it's wasted because you don't have a mechanism to turn all that churn and effort.
But they keep doing it. They keep doing it. They keep doing it. They keep doing it. It's wild to look at this and say all the data points show that launching something that's disruptive, that's new, it's going to take multiple pivots, and it's going to take time to scale. An adaptive leader even understands that you have to give things time. You got to hold steady and work through the process. But man, not only do they launch fast, but they kill fast too, don't they? That's the other thing.
Well, sometimes they should kill fast, right? That's entry kills stuff fast too. But what we don't do is we don't overspend early and waste all those resources. And the other problem we have when we launch big and expect big outcomes right away, sometimes we kill products that really have.
That's what I'm getting at. That's
market opportunity.
Yes.
Before we actually test them out and see if they
thought your engine was going to be so great that it was all going to work out, and realizing that that could have been the best thing since sliced bread, but you didn't give it the proper understanding, the proper, you
Yep.
know, go to market strategy to learn and adapt.
Well, and that's the learn and adapt piece is the piece that's critical for these disrupt products. Now, and the other problem I think that a lot of times happens in bigger companies, I think that this is another thing happens in bigger companies, is they don't launch disruptive products very often. They're mostly doing incremental stuff. And a lot of times when it's an incremental improvement, you understand the customer, you understand the market, you understand the competitive nature of the market. You can launch an incremental product that way and get away with it.
Yeah.
Most times you can, but with the disruptive, because all the assumptions build into the sales model, a lot of them are accurate because they're based on things that are, have historical data to operate from. With disruptive product, you don't have that.
So first you got to make a decision. You got to look at the type of product you have and understand where it fits as it relates to, your current customers, your current operational capability, your current sales model, and your current marketing model. If it maps up, then it's an iteration or a new product for an existing market. What you're saying is you got to really truly understand that you're trying to bring out something that disrupts not only the marketplace you're going into, but your organization as well.
In the marketplace, the individual customer, and then your organization, because frankly, launching a disruptive technology is a whole different process than launching an incremental product.
That's really it. That's where, and sometimes companies do it as a protective mechanism. They do a spin out, which allows that spin out company to have a very myopic focus and operate like a startup.
Right.
But that necessarily isn't always the best way to go. So tell me, why is small better?
What's that?
Why is small better?
So why is small better? So kind of I kind of break it out. The 10 reasons I think it's better, I kind of break it out to one that's really important in the beginning, one's really important in the end, and then a whole bunch of really big, really sweet benefits that sit in the middle. But the first one that's really, really important is that when you're doing disruptive products, when you get small, the one thing that I'm looking for is creating a big delta. And when I say delta, the delta I'm talking about is the delta between the problem that the customer has today and the difference in the improvement that happens from the solution that you're now delivering. So, if I've got on a scale of 1 to 10, if the problem's 4 and the benefit's 7, in a bigger market, it's going to be much harder for me to penetrate that market, get early adopters, get the innovators, finding those. Now, if my problem's a 2, like it's really a big problem, like they're really, the solution they're doing today is really poor and they're suffering, like patients are dying or something like that, or it's taking them, this is a procedure that takes them 2 hours, and then my solutions either saves patients, so the solution's a 9 or a 10, or I can knock 2 hours off of a 4-hour operating room case. That I increase that delta. As soon as I increase that delta between the existing problem of today and the promise of the future, it makes it much easier for me to enter markets then. It makes me much easier to get customers. It shortened the sales cycle.
What's the logic of that? What's the rationale? Why?
Well, first of all, one is that you got to tap into, a couple things. One is you got to tap into the existing pain. If a customer is not having pain, or they're not, or their life isn't really, really bad because of in the area that you're addressing, getting their attention is almost, I'm calling on doctors and physicians all the time. Getting their attention, even to pitch to them, is almost impossible.
Of course. Okay, so that's one of the whys.
One is just getting in the door and talking to them. The other thing is that when the pain's that high, the innovators and the early adopters will already be looking for a solution to that problem if the pain's that high. So I'm looking for that. So
looking.
I call this the difference of trying to push something into the marketplace as opposed to tapping into an existing pool, something that's going to pull me into the marketplace. You and I talked about this in another one where I had a client I was working with that was trying to sell into pharmacies and hospitals, and their technology could deliver chemotherapeutics more accurately, or and the oncologists really didn't care about plus or minus 10% in the
Yep.
chemotherapeutic. But when we went to the pediatric pharmacy, their technology could actually save lives of newborns. And you want to talk about high pain, saving the death of a baby.
Like you said, that's on the CEO and CFO's level too. Not just because they're good people, but they don't want the malpractice and the PR debacle that will cause.
Exactly. So now if I had to pick where they go to chemotherapy, which was a much bigger market, a much bigger opportunity versus peds. Peds is easy because the pain's so high and the potential benefit of what I'm doing is so great. I'm potentially tapping into a pool, and as you comment, not just from the physician or the caregivers, but also from the administrative side. So you're addressing not a clinical pain, but you're also addressing the financial pain. So that's kind of the first thing. I'm looking to increase that delta, and the best way to do that, you generally can't do that when you go to broad markets. The way you tend to increase that delta or that sensitivity, high pain, high benefit, is to go small.
Well, that's the thing. You got to watch out. It's not just theoretical. You got to go in there and do the work, right?
Oh, absolutely. But if you're calling on the wrong market, or you have to think segment, you're beating your head up against the wall. Whereas here, it's still, you and I talked about, it's still probably the hardest thing to do in business. It's selling to launch a disruptive technology, but this makes life getting in the door a lot easier.
Now, can it be too small?
I always get that. People always challenge me on that.
Universe size. A product manager will always consider universe size as part of their process in doing the research.
So from a universe size, it's big is good. From entering a market or getting an entry into a market, big is usually bad. So yeah, from an entry standpoint, you probably can't have too small a market as long as there's options or you can see potential paths to expand that market once you're in it.
Okay, so the key thing is that I agree. So you're looking at this, say, a smaller entry point gives you a lot more time to research and figure out the threshold of the pain versus the need, right? As you talked about, making that delta bigger and bigger.
You want to delta as big as you possibly can.
Then you also have to be thinking, what's the path? Where else does it go? Where does this stream of revenue move beyond this, and is it possible?
Yeah, and when I'm preparing to go to market, David, I just look at a real broad sense of that. As long as the market, the universe that I can operate in is big enough, I don't really care much beyond that. Now, then my whole focus becomes, how do I enter the market? How do I find that initial entry point? Because the one thing I do know for a fact, if I'm pre-market and I'm looking at my market strategy, whatever I think is that secondary or tertiary market once I'm in the market, before I'm in the market, what I think it's going to be versus what it's actually going to be once I'm in the market and I have that market intelligence and knowledge of actually being inside the market, I can guarantee it's going to be a completely different plan.
It's interesting you're saying, because you're taking it, you're also attacking it from a sales mindset too, where you want to be able to get in there and really truly be able to present and communicate to the potential buyers. And you're right in the fact that you don't know as you go into the second and third, say, what do they call it, separations, if you will, degrees of separations, which usually are a bigger universe size. You're not necessarily going to see know exactly what you're going to be saying to them. It's going to change, and that you just have to learn how to adapt and flow through that.
Yeah, but the other thing I'm saying here, David, is when you're inside the market selling in it, the example I was using earlier. So once I'm in selling into the pediatric pharmacy around saving kids, infants, I'll have a whole different access to the larger pharmacy in the hospital. Plus, I'll have knowledge base of working from the inside, where I see my second market completely changes once I'm in that once I'm in working inside the market versus before I'm in the market and looking from the outside. So there's just a level of knowledge, a level of understanding, and if you're smart and creative, a level of strategy that you can bring that you can't bring when before you're actually in that market.
All right. So, and remember, folks, comments or thoughts on this, please do not hesitate to dig into it with us. And certainly you're getting into a tough area here because people want instant profits. They want instant success. And, you know, they're going to roll big. I had that when I was marketing a B2C product. We went big real fast, you know, trying to learn as we went. We probably could have done it a lot more iteratively. You know, I've seen a lot of nice to knows go out there for learning products because people didn't do enough research, and we, you know, spent a gosh awful amount of money, time working through it. Yep. And we probably could have dissected it deeper. So with that, list them out. List out some of the top 10s.
So yeah, and before I jump into the top to 2 through 9, let me just say this. I think that this going small, I think, is the way to get early revenue quickly too. Because you get, again, this, and this is one of the other reasons for it, your sales cycle gets much shorter. If I'm tapping into a smaller problem that has higher pain and a higher benefit of solving it, my sales cycle, which is always the longest when you're at the launch of the product, obviously over time you get better and better on selling. It's always going to be longest. But if I'm going after these niche markets, I'm going to close revenue faster and more.
I did this with direct mail. I did this with direct mail, actually. So I would penetrate a market with direct mail, very specific, very tactical. And then if I saw scale, I would scale it up. And then once the salespeople saw it, then they would adjust their sales process accordingly, and they would start selling, and I would have to mail it less.
That's exactly how these small markets work, right? You get in, you get some early sales, you figure out the process, you then repeat that.
That's what we did.
Improve it, and then you push.
And now the salespeople believe
to the rest of the sales force, and even though it's a small portion of the market, you're getting revenue from that portion, and then you start leveraging that into the bigger and bigger markets, and this is how you grow. And when you go broad and big, you get all these shotgun activity that's not concentrated and not repeatable, and you can't get, and you don't see the revenue growth that's consistent there.
B2C people did this all the time. I mean, they used to test. The B2C companies did this all the time. I mean, what was it? McDonald's was testing a veggie chicken sandwich in like 3 or 4 constituencies and or cities in America. You see this a lot, but the B2Bers, we typically have a struggle with this because I don't think we quite understand within every B2B there's a C. There's a buyer there. That buyer, you have to learn about that buyer. It's not just the institution buying.
Yes.
Okay, so you told us about 1 and
so that's
2 and 9. 2 and 9.
The other one's a shorter sales cycle, right? We talked about that. The other of my favorites are, one is you stay under the radar of competition. And this is one of the other things I hate about big product launches, is you telegraph to all your competitors exactly what you're doing. When you go after these small markets, they tend to be under the radar of the competition out there. People aren't paying attention to them, and you can get market traction, market intelligence, and get and start building reputation in the marketplace without getting the attention of the competitors. So there's another one. You get to be a big player if you're a startup, and I've done this over and over again. You get to be a big player in a small pond, and that becomes a leverage point. You become quote unquote the expert, the market leader in a small pond. That can, and a lot of times that's where your leverage point becomes to getting into bigger markets. I did this with a startup I did in the genomic space we've talked about before, where we went after small government and small biotech labs. Mm-hmm. But what we learned from going after those labs is how to get into big pharma and the big biotech. It wasn't where our competitors were. Our competitors were going on the discovery side. We went after the clinical side, which is where the leverage point became, and we became an expert in that area, and outcompeted the guys that had 10 times the resources as us. So the other thing this allows you to do, and this is really interesting, Dave, it allows you to stay lean and efficient early on. When you go small, you don't have to build out a big sales team to do it. You don't have to have a big marketing campaign to do it. You go after small markets, the resources you need to market, to actually and sell into that market are much smaller or much less. So not only do you conserve resources, and this is often one of the biggest costs of going big early is, and this happens with most startups or most companies launching products, is they don't hit revenue plan, right?
Yep.
The revenue we always overestimate what we're going to do and underperform. But what we don't underperform on is the expenses we expend. We scale up the team, we scale up the marketing, all that gets scaled. So now we have all these sales and marketing expenses are expended, but we're not getting the revenue results.
I just went through that. And yes, it's the same client I talk about a lot, but went through that same process. I had to pull all the marketing and marketing and sales system back in as we started to try to refigure out what the go-to-market work looked like because of it being a disruptive product. So, all right, so you have time to learn, right?
And then that's what adds in there. You get, you have you have lower marketing costs, you have time to learn. The other thing that happens in small markets, David, is when you're a big player in a small pond, you can leverage the virality of it. If you're a small player in a big pond, nothing gets viral. When you have a big presence in a small pond, things do get viral. So you can start tapping in, the holy grail of marketing, right, is referrals and word of mouth. What's that?
I think B2B doesn't realize it as much as the B2C, especially insurance salespeople, financial salespeople, accounting salespeople, or companies, heavy referral orientation.
Yeah.
I'm really trying to look at that as it relates to us and go more viral referrals and try to figure out ways to actually get them through some of the third-party providers as well. So that viral is important because then it touches market that you would never be able to touch before.
And it drives down your costs of acquiring customers.
Oh, big time. Yeah, the cost of market.
Huge time. But you can't, but I mean, that's my point. The point is that if you try to be, if you're a small early player in a big market, or if you're just going after a big market, you can't, there's not enough touches between your market players to have virality. When you go after these small niche markets, you can get virality actually very quickly. It's amazing how quick you can potentially get there.
Let's say like a mosquito that jumps in a deadly virus.
Well, that's my, I think of that's more from that's my analogy for competitors. You're a mosquito on the ass of an elephant.
Yep.
But before you know it, you're carrying a virus, and next thing you know, the elephant's sick, and that's the big, or a gorilla. I guess that's the best analogy, to be a gorilla.
All right. So what's number 10? What's number 10? Big bad number 10.
And this is the biggest one, and it goes back to where we started the conversation. And this is how you go big. When you're a small player penetrated in the big market, when you're a big player, when you're a small player in a small market where you actually can be big, appear as big, it gives you the market intelligence, the market knowledge to figure out what levers to pull on that market to get big. So when you're in the market operating and you're actually truly making the difference that you say, that's the delta. Like, when you're really making doctors taking a problem that's really big and solving that problem in a great way. Now you've got the attention, you've got the trust of that marketplace. You now have the opportunity to go big. And this is how companies go big. And you just repeat what you did over and over again to give it this. And if we go back to the beginning conversation and talk about Facebook did it. They went to Harvard, they went to Ivy Leagues, they went to universities, they took over the world.
Oh yeah.
Uber, we talked about, they started at the train station in San Francisco. They went to Greater San Francisco. They went to they went over to Oakland, or they went down to Silicon Valley, and then they started repeating that throughout. Now they had something they could continue to repeat.
Yeah, they can repeat. That's right. That's the key.
And if you look at what's the
I like it because it gives you a bit of a longer runway. Your longer runway to let time and learning get to the point where you can really figure out what to do.
and that figuring out what to do to kind of capture the broader market, you can be smart and intelligent how you do that, but you can't really speed that up.
Looks like we need a new term.
It takes time.
Looks like we need a new term instead of entrepreneurship. I think this, your concept of agile market entry for big companies could be the better word. Agile market entry for disruptive products, because the issue to me is truly mindset. It's like,
yes,
you don't do the analysis to see that you have a disruptive product. You treat it like either an incremental innovation or just a product that still fits in your given marketplace with your given customers. You send it out to your salespeople and you expect it to work across the board.
Yeah, and then you complain and you blame that of other people why it's not working.
That's right. And then it goes into the dumpster, and there's probably, for every 10 in the dumpster, there's probably 2 you could take back and resell and make money on doing it the right way.
Not only resell and make money, you can make a huge impact on the marketplace. And if it's truly disruptive and it truly makes that difference with the customer that we're talking about, you can use it to leverage your whole product line. You then enter new customers with that technology, and you start pulling along your whole product line.
The Fred Sanford of old med tech. Chris with his dump truck coming in, pulling all those old med tech devices and putting it into the yard, and people are buying them.
But but think about the VP of sales. You give him new accounts that he can bring all of his products into. That impact can have an impact across the whole organization. And instead of what happens is they go down this path that we talk about, launch big, don't have the impact, end up shelving that product, and they never can take advantage of what it can do across.
And the startup hires too many salespeople too quickly, spends too much on marketing, ad marketing, social marketing, eyeball marketing. When they haven't done the process appropriately, then they have to decommission all that and restart again. And they most likely probably ran out of runway before they decommission.
Yep. Or they've diluted the value of their company so much that their return on investment is going to go way down. I mean, this happens all the time. The upside of doing this well is enormous. The downside is kind of what we see happen all the time.
In most cases. All right. Any last words? Let the folks go. If you have a last comment for us, please don't hesitate to share it. But Chris, any last words?
No, I think we pretty much covered it today, David.
I do like your pink shirt, by the way. You look very good. I love it. I'm not in my typical home base. As you can see, I am blurred out because I share an office with a crazy person and she's very messy. So I have to blur it out.
I don't know that, but I am in my pink thing. The one thing I will leave people with is I'm talking with some other folks to join us. I've got a reimbursement woman that I'm going to have join us for one of these. I've got a gentleman that's at a big med tech company that I want to bring in and talk about the challenges of doing this in larger companies. And then I have a long-term friend that's done this over and over again in startups. And we haven't figured out what we want to talk about yet, but
you'll figure it out.
You'll figure that out too. But we've got some guests that we're starting to line up for the future.
Why small is better than big, and small takes you to big, or small gets you quickly to figure out what's wrong so you don't go big and waste a ton of money.
Yep.
All right, big dog. Great job. Thank you so much, Chris. Have a good one, all. Ending broadcast.
Goodbye, everybody.